Before the 80s, mid-market plastic model locomotives looked like this. They certainly got the point across, but they leave a lot to be desired to our imagination. But in 1989, a very unlikely manufacturer dared to challenge that status quo. Now, that manufacturer was Lifelike Trains, which got started making model kits for airplanes and cars, with their first train product being a train tunnel first produced in the mid 50s. Lifelike Trains was formed in 1970 with their acquisition of old Varney tooling. Lifelike was always a more down market manufacturer, producing very entry level train sets that many would not see as anything more than a toy. In 1989, Lifelike changed their own mentality with the release of their Proto 2000 BL2, and the model railroading world took notice. They certainly weren't the first company to do this, with Bachmann releasing their acclaimed Spectrum line the year before, but both lines are very different, and I want to talk about how great Proto 2000 actually was. I have three Proto 2000 locomotives here, and I'm going to tell you all about what made these locomotives so special. Let's start with these boxes. The boxes for these diesel locomotives have a photo or drawing of the locomotive with a fold-up flap that shows their features. This GP7 box even has a prototype history and a side and front drawing of the locomotive you have purchased. You may have noticed the limited edition text, and yes, all of these locomotives were limited run, at least for a while. So let's start with the E7A. First thing you'll notice upon opening the box is that the chassis and body come separate. This was to show off the quality of Lifelike's new mechanism, and boy is it a quality mechanism. All three of the locomotives I have here today boast excellent pulling power and are silky smooth runners, thanks to a heavy die-cast chassis with massive flywheels. Putting the chassis on the E7's plastic body, and wow, this is quite a handsome looking locomotive. Every detail on this locomotive is well represented, with the livery and lettering being put spot on and crisp, all down to that number. Every little handrail, wiper, horn, and the hooks on the top are all represented as per the prototype, with even the axle boxes on the trucks where the axles sit being separate pieces. There's a singular light on the front that emits a yellowish color, and there are no noticeable seam lines on the roof, which would have been quite something back in the 90s. The only real gripes I have with this locomotive is the lack of an interior, but that's really a nitpick, and the couplers on this locomotive actually swing with the trucks, which is a odd design choice, most likely to negotiate 18-inch radius curves. With the price of this locomotive brand new being comparable to more mid-market trains of the time, these flaws are easily forgiven. This particular example is from the early 2000s, but it appears the E7 first appeared in the Proto 2000 lineup in 1997. Next up is the SD7. I have the EMD demonstrator livery here, and this is an earlier Proto 2000 locomotive, with the decoder socket being of an older design. Under the hood, once again, is a heavy die-cast chassis with dual flywheels, just like the E7. Once again, we have a plastic body with every handrail, horn, and hook represented, although the axles do not have covers, so no removable axle boxes this time around. There's a light on both ends of this locomotive that also illuminate the marker lights and number boards. The couplers are fixed on this locomotive, presumably since it's much shorter than the E7. This particular locomotive is the 2001 release, with the SD7 tooling dating back to 1995. Reliving the magic of steam in HO scale restricted you to either brass or less fine scale plastic and die-cast model before the 90s. Steam locomotives generally looked like this, and it's just what you had. At least until 1998, when Bachmann decided to change the world with their 280 locomotive released under their Spectrum line. This highly detailed locomotive boasted so many separately fitted parts, an open chassis with no gears sticking through, and it was all at an affordable price. Well, Lifelike wasn't going to sit this one out. In 2000, Lifelike debuted their first Proto 2000 Steam Heritage Collection locomotive with the mighty 2882. They took their approach to diesel locomotives, turned it up to 11, and applied it to a steam locomotive. In 2001, they debuted their second steam locomotive, and that's the one I have here. This is the Proto 2000 USRA 080, and this is a locomotive that is so unbelievably amazing, and yet it comes in the most boring and unassuming box of all time. It's literally just a red box with some gold text. Whoop-de-doo-doo! Nothing on the back, no view window. Damn, this is lame. Opening up the box, we agree with the paperwork. Now, this is starting to get spicy. First thing is a goddamn certificate of quality? Oh, what? Next is an accessory order form. Okay, that's not very cool. Not one, but two warranty cards for some reason, an operating manual, and hands down the coolest thing here, the entire history of the locomotive type, complete with how the design evolved over the years, who originally bought them, what happened to them. And the coolest thing, It affirms you that part of your purchase of this locomotive helped contribute to a railroad historical society of the road you purchased. Now that is badass. Okay, let's get to the star of the show. Let's talk about the locomotive. The locomotive comes packed in a standard plastic case inside of a foam box. The tender comes in just foam, but it's easily sufficient to protect it. Out of the box, this thing doesn't exactly drop kick the Spectrum 280 to the curb or anything like some of the diesel locomotives, but it certainly is a higher quality model, as it should be. You paid more for it than you'd ever pay for that 280. It comes with the same features as the diesel locomotives we already talked about, with a heavy die-cast chassis and is DCC ready with a socket in the tender. The locomotive has a working headlight on both ends and couples together with the best locomotive tender coupling system I've ever seen, with the drawbars and the wires being contained in one piece. Brilliant. Detail is second to none, and it probably makes brass locomotives jealous. Actually, it does make brass locomotives jealous. This thing has to be one of the smoothest running locomotives I've ever owned. I could find exactly one molded pipe on this locomotive, and just like the Bachmann 280, there is an open space under the locomotive's boiler, as it should be. The backhead detail is all here, complete with exactly one painted gauge, though. The tender is not an exception to this detail either. With tiny chains going to the tender trucks, there are ribbed wheels, and very, very fine handrails on the front, rear, and top of the tender. The only real issue I have with this locomotive is that the driver's center is unpainted, and all that wonderful detail makes it a bitch to handle. The first one is the most nitpicky nitpick of all time, and the second is what most of you youngins would call a skill issue. It's easily a 10 out of 10 locomotives, and I can't believe this thing is 20 years old. Lifelike would continue to produce the Proto 2000 line until 2007, when it was turned into Walther's Proto after their acquisition of Lifelike in 2005. Walther's would continue to produce the line up until today, and they added their own products to the lineup. Proto 2000 was not perfect, some roads didn't get the exacting details correct, and the drive gears tended to have issues. But these locomotives have relatively few issues and can easily be overlooked because on the used market, Proto 2000 diesels are easily the best value locomotives you can purchase. Most of the diesels can be had for somewhere in the $50 to $100 range used, and the steam locomotives are usually in the $200 to $400 range. The steam locomotives are certainly pricey, but they bring so much to the table, and I still see their value as being incredibly good. Under Walther's, Proto may be a mere shell of its former self today, but that cannot take away the impact that they have left on the HO scale world. They are bargains today and get my glowing recommendation to buy over almost anything. Almost anything.